Kidd dreamed of becoming a captain in the British Royal Navy. In 1695, he sailed to meet with the King of England. The king said no to a job in the Navy, but gave him a secret mission instead: hunt down pirates and return stolen treasure to Britain. Kidd searched for months but didn't find any pirates. Then, in the Indian Ocean, he spotted the Kara merchant. Kidd thought he'd legally captured a pirate ship. He didn't know the ship was secretly backed by a British company. Uh-oh. Kidd was on his way back to Britain when he found out he was wanted for piracy. He was sure he'd done nothing wrong. He got a faster ship from friends near today's Dominican Republic and sailed for Britain to prove his innocence. He left the Kara merchant with friends. But his friends didn't want to get in trouble. They unloaded the ship, set it on fire, and let it drift. When Kidd got to Britain, he was immediately thrown in jail. He was found guilty of piracy and hung. 300 years later, archaeologists found a pile of cannons and anchors near the Dominican Republic where the Kara merchant was last seen. Could this be Captain Kidd's ship?
Before he became a pirate, Every served in the Royal Navy for a time, likely seeing combat in the 9 Years' War. When he was discharged, he turned to slave trading along Africa's coast. He eventually ended up on a ship called the Charles II that was charged with raiding the French. In 1694, Every led a mutiny on the Charles II, taking the ship over and eventually being elected captain. He renamed the ship the Fancy, and Every's career as a pirate officially began. After plundering a number of ships off Africa, Every set his sights on a seemingly impossible prize, the flagship of a 25-strong Mughal fleet, the Ganji Sawai. Now, the 80 cannons of the Mughal ship should have made quick work of Every's Fancy, but a very lucky broadside by the Fancy snapped the Ganji Sawai's mainmast, effectively paralyzing him. Drawing alongside, the pirates boarded the ship, and after brutal hand-to-hand fighting that lasted several hours, Every and his men were victorious. Their reward was treasure valued at over $900,000 back in the 1690s. Today, that's nearly $80 million. The battle and the theft drew the ire of England, who had a fragile relationship with the Mughals. The fact that Every and his men tortured, raped, and murdered many of the passengers they found on the Ganji Sawai didn't help any. A bounty was placed on Every's head, and the first worldwide manhunt began. 24 of the pirates were captured, with 6 being tried and hanged in London. Captain Every, on the other hand, vanished from history. To this day, no one knows what really happened to him. Some say he changed his name and lived the rest of his days in comfort on a tropical island. Others say that Every was swindled out of his riches and he wandered as a beggar, eventually dying alone and penniless. But it isn't only Every who vanished. Not much is known about where all that treasure went that he looted. Perhaps it's out there somewhere, just waiting to be found, along with the real truth behind Captain Henry Every's fate.
Up until the last few years of his life, he was just a common sailor, used to a hard life and poor wages. But from a chance encounter with pirates, Bartholomew Roberts was captured, turned pirate himself, and became the most successful sea robber of his time, whose death would signal the end of the golden age of piracy and make Forbes' list of top-earning pirates. Now, we know that Bart Roberts was born as John Roberts in Wales in 1682. That's pretty much it, and though it is said that he set out for sea at the age of 13, it isn't until Roberts was like 36 and a skilled sailor of many years that a story begins. A pirate captain named Davis was in the middle of enjoying what would become a short 10-month career of plunder. So in comes Davis, where he finds 3 ships trading in slaves, gold, and teeth anchored together in Anamobia Bay and captures all 3 of them without any resistance. Bart Roberts, the second mate of a slave ship Princess, along with the rest of his crew, are taken prisoner. So now in possession of over 140 slaves, tons of dry goods, and a huge mountain of gold dust, David sails off with his 3 ships towards the Portuguese settlements along the coast. During this time, Davis came to trust Roberts as both a highly skilled sailor as well as a fellow Welshman, and made him the pirate ship's navigator. Now, during the following weeks that brought them on their way to the island of Princes, they plundered many ships, and Roberts began to embrace the pirate's life. One day capturing a ship with the governor of Accra on board with over 15,000 pounds sterling. He probably remembered his 3 pounds a month with no chance promotion and realized that he could never go back. Once arriving at the island of Princes, they hoisted up the English flag and convinced the Portuguese that they were searching for pirates and were offered to come ashore as guests. But Davis, invited to eat with the governor, was ambushed and shot through the bowels, leaving the rest of his crew to quickly find a new captain. Roberts, even though he had been with the crew for less than 6 weeks, was elected to take Davis's place. This point would mark the beginning of Captain Bart Roberts' vicious yet victorious tenure that began with his resolve to revenge Captain Davis's death, where Roberts and 30 of his men returned to overwhelm and set fire to the Portuguese fort, and then sailed off with 2 of their ships. Captain Bart Roberts at this point would begin capturing a string of ships, and his crew would spend the booty as if it were seawater. Some say spending 2,000 pieces of eight in a single night. But soon the provisions were drying up, and so Roberts with 40 men detached from the crew to sail on a smaller sloop to capture a brigantine laden with supplies. But with the failed attempt, they returned to find their ship gone, under the leadership of a new captain named Kennedy, who along with others wanted to return home privately to spend their gold. So they form a new set of articles which Roberts made his men sign and swear to. These articles are what has become known as the Pirates' Code. During this time, the actions of Roberts and his crew crippled seaboard trade in the West Indies. Roberts set sail for Sierra Leone. By this time, he had managed to capture a man of war and had great success targeting slave ships, having heard that the 2 Royal Navy ships that protected the area, the HMS Swallow and the HMS Weymouth, had left and wouldn't return until the end of the year. But on February 10th, the Swallow had returned and had already destroyed a few of Captain Roberts' ships in the area. Now, Roberts had just captured the Neptune and was in the middle of breakfasting with the captain when he was informed that the Swallow was literally right behind him. Most of the crew were drunk in celebration, and so Captain Roberts adorned himself in his finest clothes, dressed in a crimson waistcoat, a gold chain, put a red feather in his hat, and went out fighting, where he was struck in the throat by a grape shot and died. But before his body could be captured, the now very sober crew buried his body at sea.
You might know this next guy as Captain Morgan, who's featured on the delicious bottles of spiced rum. But did you know he actually existed? Besides making ugly girls look prettier, he was the captain of many ships and owned quite a bit of land to produce his well-known commodity. Henry Morgan was a Welsh privateer, meaning that he engaged in piracy under the Commission of War and got to keep the plunder for himself and crew. He raided Spanish settlements like Maracaibo, but his most lucrative raid came in Panama City in 1671 in response to Spanish attacks on English trade ships. The Spanish lost a huge number, even despite Morgan's crew being outnumbered nearly 5-1. They managed to plunder nearly 400,000 pesos and took much of the city's wealth. Since his piracy was technically legal, he was able to serve a role in Jamaican politics. He passed away in 1688 as a wealthy man. This was most likely due to cirrhosis of the liver, probably getting too high from his own supply.
Anne Bonny, born around 1700, was the illegitimate daughter of a lawyer and his housemaid, who immigrated to a plantation near Charleston, South Carolina shortly after her birth. Now, Annie had red hair, a fiery temper, and was always acting up, and at the age of 13 was known to have stabbed a servant girl with nothing better than a table knife. She married a small-time pirate named James, who wanted her father's wealth, but being disowned for marrying a pirate, she set fire to her father's plantation and left with James to the so-called Pirates' Republic on New Providence Island. A frequenter of local pirate taverns, she met Captain Calico Jack and fell in love with his red snazzy outfits, and so she became his lover. She then gave birth to a child in Cuba, divorced James, and married Captain Calico Jack. Mary Green was the illegitimate child to a widow of a sea captain. Her mother dressed her up as a boy to receive financial support from her mother-in-law, who apparently hated girls. Her look was so convincing that she got hired as a footboy even after the financial support ended. Finding that life was easier as a man, she continued to dress like one, boarded a man of war, and served in various regiments with honor and distinction. But she soon fell in love with a soldier, and with their military commission and the hordes of gifts she's received throughout the years from intrigued sailors, they got married and somehow bought a restaurant in the Netherlands, which they called called the Three Horseshoes. But her sickly husband died not long after, so she returned to dressing like a man and quickly found a merchant ship headed for the Caribbean. Pirates captured her ship and she was forced to join in the looting and plundering until they took on a commission to privateer. But legitimate plundering was not in the cards for Mary, and so she joined a group of pirates looking for a crew. And guess who these were? Why, no other than Captain Calico Jack and Anne Bonny. Anne Bonny saw through her disguise and the two became fabulous friends. Between all of the plundering and the pillaging, Mary still found time to take on a lover. And as the story goes, she saved the drunken man's life by killing the other man he was scheduled to have a duel with. It was this type of fierceness that both Anne and Mary were known for. And because their lives seemed to mirror that of the archetypical female warrior in pursuit of love and liberty, they have become integrated into mainstream society. In fact, it was mostly because of these two infamous crew members that Captain Calico Jack and his love for flamboyant clothing is even remembered today. So the good times continued to roll with lots of rum and plundering parties, and it seemed like life couldn't get any better for the threesome. Then one evening in October 1720, Anne and Mary were with the rest of the crew getting smash-faced drunk off the coast of Jamaica when BAM! They were surprised by a British man of war. The whole male crew scurried below deck and hid themselves under blankets, leaving Mary and Bonny to fight the whole British Navy alone. The two women made a valiant effort against the onslaught of trained Navy sailors as they tried their best to get the crew to join the battle, telling them to bite the bullet and fight. As the story goes, Mary and Anna eventually turned their anger towards the pirates huddling below deck after finding they were outnumbered by like 30 to 1, and began firing their pistols into the hold of panicky pirates, killing and injuring several before everyone surrendered. Before this happened, remember, Captain Jack and Anne were lovers, and now that everyone was sentenced to hang, Anne gave her former lover a visit where she is famously known to have told him before his execution that if he had only fought like a man, he need not have hanged like a dog. Well, both Anne and Mary were also found guilty, but during their sentencing, they were able to postpone execution by claiming that they were both pregnant. It is said that Mary died a violent death in prison before the birth of her child, and that Annie's wealthy father bought her release after her child was born. But I tend to believe the story where the two were sneaked out of prison secretly and moved to Louisiana, where they raised their children together and lived happily ever after.
This French buccaneer cruised the Caribbean Sea during the 1660s and had a particular taste for blood. He wreaked much havoc on Spanish settlements and sacked the town of Maracaibo in modern-day Venezuela. And him and his crew breached the fort called San Carlos de la Barra that contained 16 cannons. He got the nickname the Flail of the Spanish for seizing a large amount of treasure from them. A little bit on the crazy side, Francois apparently enjoyed torture and was quite good at it. He was even accused of literally eating a Spaniard's heart, qualifying him as a certified cannibal. They then went on to San Antonio de Gibraltar and killed 500 Spanish soldiers. Despite them being outnumbered, they seized a large amount of treasure in the process. Rumor has it that karma got the best of Francois and he was eaten by a tribe of natives in present-day Honduras.
When I came across Blackbeard, it was just like a light bulb going off. I mean, this guy was straight out of central casting as far as Hollywood's concerned. I mean, you wouldn't believe it if it wasn't there in a book that this guy did what he did. It's just fantastic stuff, and you can't make that stuff up.
In the latest Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides, Blackbeard himself turns up. So who was the real Blackbeard? He's reported to have been over 6 feet tall, unusually large for the age. The documents that do describe him paint a picture of a larger-than-life character, a man capable of extreme and unpredictable violence. The unprovoked kneecapping of his first mate is just one example recorded in this book. Published in 1724, it's the definitive text on piracy in the 18th century and has been referenced extensively by Angus Constam, Blackbeard's biographer.
Johnson gives a great description of Blackbeard, and probably this is the one that's influenced pirate films and pirate fiction more than anything else.
In time of action, he wore a sling over his shoulders with a brace of pistols hanging in holsters like bandoliers. He wore a fur cap and stuck a lighted match in each side under it. His eyes, naturally looking fierce and wild, made him look altogether such a figure.
Francis Drake, sea captain, privateer, navigator, slaver, politician, and to the Spanish, a pirate. During the Elizabethan era, Drake was the second ever to circumnavigate the globe, and the first Englishman to do so. Drake's exploits were so grand that England regarded him as a hero. He was knighted by Queen Elizabeth I after returning to England in 1581. Drake is still known today as one of the most legendary privateers in history. At the age of only 12, Drake started his sailing career. Drake's father apprenticed his son to his neighbor, a shipmaster who transported merchandise to France and other European countries. The shipmaster was so impressed with Drake's skills and conduct that he left the bark to Drake upon his death. This shows that Drake was a skilled sailor even in his youth. In 1572, Queen Elizabeth I commissioned Drake as a privateer to sail to the Americas. In his first raid, Drake and his men captured the town and its treasure. He was injured during the battle and his men left the treasure to save his life. But, determined to capture a treasure shipment, Drake stayed in the area for almost a year, raiding Spanish shipping. In 1577, Drake was again commissioned by the Queen. This time, however, Elizabeth wanted Drake to undertake an expedition to the Pacific coast of the Americas to disrupt Spanish supply lines. All written accounts of Drake's voyage was considered classified, and the crews on all 4 of the ships were sworn to secrecy. Drake sailed north along the west coast of South America, attacking Spanish ships, ports, and towns. During this time, he captured a hefty load of gold, wine, and treasure. Drake headed across the Pacific, and eventually reached a group of islands in the southwest Pacific. He sailed along the tip of Africa, rounding the Cape of Good Hope, and returned home. September 1580, the Golden Hind landed in Plymouth with a very rich cargo. Drake became known as the first Englishman to circumnavigate the Earth. Queen Elizabeth I awarded Drake knighthood aboard the Golden Hind on April 1581.
Qin Shi was the leader of one of the biggest pirate fleets of all time. But her story doesn't start so gloriously. And yes, she was a woman. Qin was just a 26-year-old prostitute in Canton when Cheng, who was the leader of a small fleet called the Red Flag Fleet, sacked her brothel and brought her on board for himself. She accepted to marry him only if she was given an equal share of plunder and authority. With Qin Shi at his side, Cheng made his 200-ship gang into a proper army of around 1,800 ships and 17,000 pirates ready to kick ass. Their looting was the most fearsome, and many pirate captains wanted to form an alliance with them or just simply fight under the red flag. Cheng died in a storm and Qin Shi took over the leadership. She made her adopted pirate son second in command and let him lead the battles, although she was still the one deciding on the strategies of warring. Qin Shi was also aware that it wasn't easy to be a badass pirate and accept a woman as a leader. So she made a system of laws to show that she wasn't messing around. If you disobey an order or give an order that wasn't originally hers, you get beheaded. If you steal anything from the treasury, you get beheaded. If you hide some of the loot, you get beheaded. If you rape any of the prisoners, you get beheaded. But on the other hand, if you have consensual sex, the girl gets cannonballs as anklets and gets dropped in the sea, and you also get beheaded. Qin Shi developed the administrative side of the whole pirate stuff, as she had towns and provinces pay taxes, ships pay toll for free passage, knowing that if they didn't, they wouldn't last long. She had 80,000 pirates under her helm, farmers who supplied food, spies in the emperor's army, and was pretty much unchallenged in the South Chinese Sea. Now, as you can imagine, the Emperor of China wasn't all too happy about an indestructible army of pirates doing whatever they want in his lands. He raised his imperial fleet and attacked Qin Shi. It seemed to somehow slip the emperor's mind that Qing was an exceptional military strategist and his fleet was defeated with 63 ships stolen. Qin was also a very persuasive woman and made many of the imperial soldiers choose to become her pirates. And these soldiers did have an alternative, the alternative being getting nailed down, literally nailed down, and beaten to death. And knowing Qin, they were probably beheaded later as well. After doing everything there was really to do, the emperor found a different approach. He offered her an amnesty, which she immediately refused. However, she changed her mind and decided to accept the peace treaty only if all of her crew would be given the amnesty and they would get to keep the loot acquired. The emperor agreed. After the retirement, Qin Shi opened a gambling house and a brothel, which she ran successfully until her death at the age of 69. She died with a noble title of Lady by Imperial Decree, which granted her legal protection that only the aristocracy enjoyed. Not bad for a girl who started off as a prostitute.